Thank you so much for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders, and we discuss issues that impact Colorado and the region. I'm Tammy Schaefer, your on-air producer, and this week we're focusing on transportation, and we're very fortunate to have everybody who knows about it from CDOT, our Colorado Department of Transportation. And we're going to talk today with Rebecca White, Deputy Director of External Programs and Outreach with the Central 70 Project. Rebecca, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you.
And Tony DeVito, Director of the Central 70 Project. So Tony, great to have you.
Glad to be here.
And this is, I think, what everybody wants to hear about. You know, we've heard wind of what's going to happen with this I-70 redesign, and it has to be a massive undertaking.
It truly has been. We've been looking at this project in the planning phase through the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act process, for over 14 years now. And with that, we've looked at numerous different alternatives, and we honestly believe that we have an alternative that best fits the needs of all of our customers.
And how do you go about that? Let's give a quick skimming overview of what's going on, because we have this portion of I-70 that was raised. Was that in the 70s or 80s?
Really was kind of planned in the 50s, built in the 60s, yeah. So.
Right, and it's existed since
really
then.
For a population of the 80s.
Well, they were trying to look ahead, right?
Right.
Yeah. So now we're looking at lowering that and possibly putting a cap over it?
So really the heart of the project, and probably the hardest area that we've had to tackle, is the viaduct that is now 52 years old.
53.
53.
Wow.
And that old structure has had a series of repairs over time. Those repairs we knew had a time limit, and really investing any more money into that structure just is not prudent for the citizens of Colorado.
Yeah, is that throwing good money after bad at that point?
It really is, and if you look at what we've had to do because of how the structure was built, we've had to take the shoulders and turn it into operable lanes. It takes nothing but a flat tire and overheat to really fail the system. It's a struggle for our emergency responders to get through that area when it is backed up, and so in addition to just the structural integrity, just the inability for it to operate safely is really been one of our focuses. And with our opportunity to lower that and put it below grade with appropriate lane widths and A-cell, D-cell lanes and safety shoulders, we will been able to hopefully reconnect then the community by building this 4-acre park right in the center portion there.
Which originally, it sounds like that was the original intent of making the raised interstate in the first place, was to keep those communities from getting disconnected, but that didn't
really, I don't believe it really has worked.
No.
You know, if you just don't get that sense of connectivity living in the shadow of that
of a big
that structure. Correct.
Living in a shadow, that's a really good way to put it. I think that it must feel a little oppressive too. And
it is, and you know, your noise patterns, your snow removal, a retread. We have a building that we're operating a lot of our training classes in there. We've had a retread come off a truck and take out an air conditioning unit on the roof.
Oh gosh!
So you know, those things do happen, and so that having the viaduct above isn't always the best feature.
Interesting. So I think, you know, when you sat down here in the studio, I said this is what everybody wants to hear about, because I think it's hard for a lot of us, not engineers or traffic engineers, to imagine just how all of this reconstruction is going to work. So we're happy to have Tony DeVito here, Director of the Central 70 Project, to kind of enlighten us and tell us how this is going to go. When does this begin, and what are we in store for starting off?
Okay, so overall, the major intent of the project is to add an express lane in each direction. Tolled expressway, very similar to what we did on US 36, and the entire project is really from Brighton Boulevard, but we say from the Mousetrap all the way out to just past the 225 interchange. It's about 10 plus miles of overall widening. Some of it will be easier than others. So the area from 270 east to the end of the project limits is a very straightforward widening. We call that kind of a very simple fill in the middle, shift traffic, and we'll then widen to the outside, and then you're done. That will probably come online pretty early in the 4-year total construction, and you'll have some operational benefits, especially in eastbound, once that's in place. Along with that early start, we're the contractor that we have selected, Kiewit Meridian Partners, will be building also excavating to the north of the existing viaduct. And we get a question a lot of times about this. When they're doing this, it's probably more disruptive and impactful to the community, but the people on the viaduct, just because of the view angle, they probably won't even see much of this for the first 2 years of what's going on down below. And then the phasing will be westbound traffic will be shifted down into the lowered section. Even though we call it one viaduct, they are two separate structures, and so the westbound viaduct will be then demolished. Kiewit Meridian then will excavate the rest of the lowered section, and at that point eastbound traffic will be then lowered into the lowered section, and then the eastbound structure will be demolished.
Wow. And when, I think we're all anticipating the impact of this, when does it really begin?
So we're anticipating starting in June, June, July, this summer of 2018, current schedule that we're on. That should be, should start seeing some more and more activity as we approach that time frame, as they're out there completing their surveying and doing other things.
Now, obviously, this work is very necessary, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show. You know, you're dealing with something that was, you said, designed in the 50s, built in the 60s, intended for the 80s.
That's what we really believe. I mean, that's really where when we started seeing the operational failures of that.
Well, and then, you know, from the 80s on, the kind of growth Denver's seen in terms of population and coming from different, you know, so many transplants from different states, they couldn't have expected or anticipated in the 60s what we'd be in store for today.
Absolutely. Rebecca, you probably have a little more on the history of how this area developed over the time.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge, is both being able to look backward and you know, sort of reevaluate, did we do this project right to begin with back in the 60s? Should the highway have gone there, and why was it built? And then trying to project forward to what Colorado will need in the future.
Right, a lot of planning now. So we're happy to have both Rebecca White and Tony DeVito here from the Central 70 Project to tell us what we can expect and exactly how it's going to go down. We'll be right back with more here on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us. Thanks so much for staying with us here on Connect and Collaborate. This week we are focusing on transportation and specifically taking a look at the Central 70 reconstruction, and I'm very pleased to have two people from the Central 70 Project here with me. Tony DeVito is the director of the Central 70 Project, and Rebecca White is the Deputy Director of External Programs and Outreach for Central 70 Project. So glad to have you both here. This is definitely a topic I think everybody's interested in, because I think our lives are going to be affected for some time. Am I right, Tony?
Yeah, the Kiewit Meridian Partners is the contractor that the developer that we had selected, and one of the reasons that we selected him is their project delivery was one of the more aggressive. They've got a 4-year delivery timetable, and that was very important as we were in the planning process to a lot of our stakeholders.
Yeah, as you can tell out there today, the highway doesn't really move right now, and so when we started to look at this pretty major construction project, we realized it, you know, really wasn't possible to just shut down lanes or fully close the interstate for any length of time. There's too many people depend on that highway. So one of the challenges we've set out for Kiewit is to keep the interstate moving as much as it can. It doesn't move great today, but they have to figure out a way to build this while keeping that interstate functioning.
Well, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of business depending on that corridor. It's massive.
1,200 businesses are along this corridor, and some of the major distribution type delivery services that are located along here. In our outreach, we've talked to a lot of them, and this is a backbone. There's not multiple east-west routes of interstate movement, and in all honesty, they've told us the majority of their service is into the Denver metro area, and so.
Well, and as you mentioned, as we were talking in the break, that you've got DIA on one end, National Western, where there's a lot of activity and probably proposing to be more, if the way I understand it, and then the access to downtown. And then I think it's still in between there, or actually I guess Amazon's on the other side of DIA, isn't it? But when that starts to...
yeah, and that's one of the interesting things we're seeing. This was an industrial corridor back since the 1800s when the rail line came in and industry sort of followed. So you have companies like Purina and Safeway that have been there since the 1930s.
Exactly.
But then more and more companies are establishing along the interstate, as they have for the last 50 years, but even now into the future, even as our economy goes more high-tech and different industries come in, we'll see companies like Amazon and others still set up along I-70 because it's their access to the rest of Colorado.
So the project is absolutely necessary, and I know that it's been quite a while in planning too, because we've talked about how long we've kind of endured with what we have. What did you say? It's at least 14 years?
Yeah, we're approaching past 14 years now of the NEPA environmental process. That was very intensive and involved a lot of community outreach and a lot of public meetings.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spoke to a group of 7th graders this morning. If you're in 7th grade, you're 12 or 13 years old, which means you were born around 2005. So we started looking at this corridor before these kids were even born.
Oh, wow.
So it's been a long time. It's not unusual for it to take a while, but this project's probably been particularly difficult for CDOT just because of the different challenges we have. The amount of traffic, the businesses, and then the really strong community interests that have made this take a little bit more time.
So as we describe how the reconstruction is going to get underway, is the entire 10 miles we're talking about going to be completely reconstructed?
At the end of the 4 years, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, there'll be a complete new roadway template with an added express lane in each direction. And
you described a little bit about it, where it's obviously going to have to come and go in pieces, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the benefits of this type of delivery that we're doing with this P3 design build is that other projects that we have done this under, the 6 and I-25 interchange, these teams come in here and they have put forth the timetable that they're going to complete this in, and they take it very seriously and aggressively, and you don't see a lot of downtime. For the traveling public, we do get feedback that, yeah, we do see the construction and it does slow us down, but there's always activity. It's not like we're not seeing any, cones and no one working.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you make, Tony, because when he talks about design build, what that means for CDOT is we do about 20 to 30% of the design. So we have a good idea of what we want to build out there, and we've worked with the community to get to that point. But then this one combined company gets that up to 100% design, and then it's that same group that builds it. And the advantage of that is you take away that disconnect from a company being given a set of plans and saying, go build this. Instead, it's the company who had all that input on what the final plans would look like and how they could improve and save money, and then they have a lot more ownership over what they're building as well. So it's a really good model for projects that are this big and frankly this complicated, because this one has some complex elements.
Would there have been any way to do this in pieces or over the years, if this was something that was designed for the 80s and it's taken this long to get it underway? But I guess that's looking at the past, so.
I think projects of this magnitude and where you have so many different stakeholders, it's difficult to break it apart and not be able to see how everything would ultimately connect. We've done other projects, and other corridor projects are going on right now on I-25 North and I-25 South, and you risk less if you can take a larger view of how you approach that project.
Right, because if you can do it in bits and pieces, you may not have the overall plan. So yes, can you describe for us, Tony or Rebecca, how will I-70 be different when this reconstruction is completed, it's going to be an entirely different interstate.
Well, the major thing that we are providing in our expansion, and we do this elsewhere, is the tolled express lane offers reliability. It always will operate at a higher level of service than the general purpose lanes. And so if you need to get to that airport, you're running late to get your kids to daycare, if you need that opportunity to get your kids softball or baseball game or football game, you have that opportunity and that choice to utilize the express lane. What we've also seen is on I-70 Mountain on US 36 is that the general purpose lanes also operate better. There's a level of service that even in the general purpose lanes by the added capacity.
And the other sort of, I guess more the aesthetic aspect is, you know, we've come to realize as we've talked to people over the years, this is the gateway into Denver, right? When you arrive from DIA and you get on I-70, your first image of Colorado is I-70. So we've thought a lot about that and how we design certain elements of it, the bridge work that goes over, how the neighborhoods are announced as you travel along, even the artwork on the retaining walls. So we've put a lot of thought into how this highway can kind of reflect Colorado and the people that live here, and what you'll see as you drive into the state. So it'll be a big difference for the residents here. I think it'll make a different impact for all the people who come here to play as well.
What will it? I try to envision, because I hear about the. I need to refer to the right word. The kind of the land or park portions that will go over the interstate. How can we envision that? I know you do have some great images on the website at Colorado Department of Transportation, CDOT, and go to Central 70 for some images of that. But how can we describe that? It's hard.
It is hard. We've struggled with that as well, and just talking to local residents there, you know, who live right now next to a dark and shadowy viaduct, to try to imagine that flipped on its head. You're taking a highway from 30 feet in the air to 30 feet beneath the ground. But the easiest way to think of it is it's a 4-acre park, and that's really what it's meant to be. It'll have room for 2 U10 soccer games, so that's 10-year-olds, 2 groups of 10-year-olds being able to play soccer. Believe it or not, it's got a splash park on it.
I was going to say, is that a pool? I'm looking at an image there. Is that a pool or is that a basketball court?
That's actually the playground for the elementary school.
Nice.
So that multi-purpose field is largely meant for the school, at least during school hours. And working with the community, that's how the splash park came about, because the kids really wanted that, and we found the engineers could do it. It'll have room for a small concert, as a little amphitheater, for farmers market, and then a play area. So if you think of just an average city park, that's what it'll be like. The difference is it's over an interstate.
Over an interstate, and I can envision it with the diagram here a little bit, and I like the idea too that the streets get to carry through over the interstate, so those through streets will be able to.
And part of this is we really want this to be well programmed. We've toured around to some of the other states that have done this. Dallas has Clyde Warren Park, and when we toured Clyde Warren, such a well programmed park, and Zumba classes going on at lunch hour, you know. And really some of the ideas from our partners with Denver is, after we visited Clyde Warren, they didn't like how the street ended with a view down to the interstate, so they kind of wanted what we call these softened bookends, which kind of helps the transition, and they can also accommodate some, you know, food vans and other things on the weekends, and help make this a better area.
Really bringing the community back. I know we want to get into what the project cost is going to be now. We're going to try and fit that into this segment, but we'll have to talk about it when we get back from this break. But can we touch on it a little bit with a few seconds left here? What are we looking at in terms of what it costs, not only to rebuild what we have, lower the interstate, and then have a community on top of it?
This is a $1.2 billion project, and that includes everything that we've done up to date, and the investment into the right-of-way that has had to be acquired, along with all the preliminary work. That cost also includes what the contractor bid, and we'll talk more in a little bit.
Yes, we'll have much more to talk about. Stay with us. We're talking with Tony DeVito and Rebecca White from the Central 70 Project. Stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. We'll have much more. Thank you. We're so glad you're staying with us today here on Connect and Collaborate, and we hope we're bringing you information you really want to hear, because we're focusing on transportation in Colorado, and specifically that Central 70 reconstruction. I'm talking with Rebecca White and Tony DeVito from the Central 70 Project, getting a really good overview of what we're in for as we're going to cope with reconstruction. And this is Tony, you mentioned this was a $1.2 billion project to reconstruct the I-70 corridor.
Correct.
Where does that money come from, and how are we going to manage it?
Okay, so the majority of the funding that's been identified for this project, $850 million, is from the Bridge Enterprise. Now, the Bridge Enterprise was established through legislation, and it basically, part of your registration fees on your vehicles, there's a little amount that goes to the poor bridges across the state. We get about little over 100 million a year from that funding program. And so what we've done is we've identified, and we didn't take 850 million, we've identified 850 million for the next 30 years as a funding source for that. This project, obviously, with the viaduct and plus other structures that are on there, do qualify for this type of funding. And actually, the viaduct is the remaining structure of the original 128 structures that were identified when that legislation was passed that we have not yet addressed. And so, and that viaduct alone represents over 60% of the poor bridge deck area in the state. So once we get that fixed, our total square footage of poor bridge deck does drastically improve across the state. Senate Bill 228 is about another 180 million. That's another Senate Bill general fund transfer for CDOT. That transfer did occur. And then we have 30 million from City and County of Denver for some of the things that they've added, along with 50 million from the Denver Regional Council of Government. And so those are our sources of funds.
So that money's not all in a pot right now.
Correct.
How are you going to get it all on the table?
Okay, so that's where we're able to leverage with the public-private partnership approach. And so in this approach, the developer brings equity to the table. The developer, in this case, will also do a significant amount of bonding through different programs. One of those programs will be TIFIA, which is about 400+ million. It's a federal program identified for road replacement or road interstate reconstruction. Along with that, they'll probably utilize some private activity bonds, around 140 million. They have and we asked each team that was competing also to bring their own equity. And so the Kiewit Meridian team has 65 million of their own equity put into this. And so during construction of an $800+ million construction estimate, we will only pay about 319 million in the first 4 or 5 years of milestone completions. The rest of that, obviously, we will pay back over time. And since this is a design, build, finance, operate, maintain contract, it also comes with a 30-year term of O&M and R, which is operate, maintain, and rehab. And so our total payment that we will do to the developer will cover 80% of that will cover the capital costs, and 20% of that payment will cover the operation, maintain, and renewal. With that, they have, they take on a little more risk of not only the construction aspects and the ad approach, but they also have to predict all the maintenance, rehab work that will happen in the future. And that's some of the benefits of doing this type of delivery, is that little bit of a risk transfer that they take on.
I see. And it's been, that had to have been quite a negotiation to get all of this funding worked out, because it seems that the state of Colorado has been in a, can I say, deficit when it comes to transportation funding? I mean, it's been tough to maintain.
really are just a maintain organization. It's been tough for us to do the types of expansion work that is so needed. And when your funding goes the majority of just maintaining what you have, you have to be creative. And we have a division within the Department of the High Performance Transportation Enterprise that allows this kind of flexible spending and initiatives that we can approach in different ways.
Thank you for putting the term maintenance in the right perspective there, because I've heard CDOT Director Shaylin Bott say that that's about where CDOT operates, is on a maintenance level. There's not a whole lot to be able to do more.
Yeah, to tackle new big projects, especially projects as big as this is, that's why we have to look at tools like public-private partnerships, and even the tolling to a certain extent helps us with that as well. There are a couple reasons we've been adding express lanes. Anytime you see a highway project around the Denver metro area, you see it coming in with this toll lane. Part of that has to do with funding, and part of that is we are growing so fast in this state that we found if we just add another free lane, general purpose lane, that tends to fill up just as quickly.
Of course, yeah.
So at least with an express toll lane, we can keep traffic moving, we can get transit on there, we can encourage carpooling so that we have a more sustainable path forward.
To go back to the project a little bit, there are going to be impacts to very close to a lot of neighbors and a lot of businesses. How is CDOT going to, what are you doing differently to assist those impacted areas?
There's actually very little about this project that we have ever done before when it comes to community. We've got about $25 million worth of commitments we've identified, and they really run the gamut. So, for instance, we have a wonderful elementary school called Swansea Elementary School that was it's been in this community for a couple hundred years, but was rebuilt in its current location next to I-70 in the 1970s. We worked with the community to try to figure out if perhaps that school could move, and the community really didn't want that. So instead, we've put to date about $15 million of improvements in that school so that they've got a state-of-the-art HVAC system, new doors and windows. We're going to move the playground. We've built them a couple new classrooms so that during that 4-year construction process, the students and the staff are as impacted as little as possible by the construction dust and noise. And then another first for CDOT, we're taking kind of that same concept to many of the homes. So we have about 300 homes that are located a block on either side of the viaduct. And for those properties, we're offering air conditioning units, interior storm windows, attic insulation, caulking, and weather stripping. Again, under that same premise that we recognize this is a big, potentially noisy project, and we want to make sure folks can stay insulated from that.
Right, kind of keep their at least a level of normalcy for them.
Right. Because the housing stock there is an older neighborhood in Denver. It was one of the original neighborhoods to establish. So a lot of these homes, have original windows, and when you've got a big project next door, that could be an impact. So we want to try to mitigate that.
You definitely notice the work being done, right? That's really impressive how CDOT has been able to address those issues. What about addressing some of that air quality during construction? That's going to be kicking up a lot of dust, I'd imagine.
Well, they won't be allowed to kick up a lot of dust.
Oh.
So a lot of what we can do is the rules and requirements we place on the contractor. Some of that comes from CDOT, and some of that comes from the environmental health agencies. So Denver Environmental Health and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment have restrictions they place on construction projects. Some things are very simple, just wetting down trucks so there's no dust. When it's windy, you use a whole different set of control measures that include some dust stabilizers. But there's things we can do on the equipment as well. One of the things with construction equipment is it can be out there for decades. That stuff will run forever. EPA has tightened the standards on non-road equipment, but for some of those older pieces, we're working with the Regional Air Quality Council to get them retrofitted, essentially to put on pollution controls so that those old pieces of equipment are as clean as brand new ones. So that's sort of the range of things that we can do out there to make this. It's a big project, but it doesn't mean it can't be done right.
Right. It doesn't have to have a negative impact on everybody around it. Thank you so much. We're talking with Rebecca White, Deputy Director of External Programs and Outreach for the Central 70 Project, and Tony DeVito, Director of the Central 70 Project, will be back with more discussing the I-70 or the Central 70 reconstruction when we come back. Stay with us. We're so glad you're staying with us today on Connect and Collaborate, and we are focusing this week on transportation and specifically the Central 70 reconstruction. I know a lot of people have questions about how this is going to be implemented, what we're in for traffic-wise, and how long all of the waits are going to be. I'm talking today with Tony DeVito, Director of the Central 70 Project, and Rebecca White, Deputy Director of External Programs and Outreach for the Central 70 Project. And Rebecca, as we were wrapping up the last segment, you touched on some concerns, environmental concerns, air quality during construction. What other projects do they have to implement to kind of ease that burden?
Yeah, and another thing we've heard a lot about from the community is the impact that the project would have on just the amount of affordable homes.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who've driven I-70 and certainly been under it, you've probably noticed that there were homes left in the 1960s very close to the viaduct. And so when we started to look at reconstructing this, there's just almost nothing we can do that wouldn't need us to acquire some properties.
Really?
They are so close.
Oh, yeah.
So we've had to buy 56 residential properties just to have room to build this project, and the community was concerned about kind of the overall impact that has on one of the last affordable areas in Denver.
Mm.
So to help make up for that a bit, we've also pledged $2 million to go towards an affordable housing program. We're still working to determine the best use of those funds. But it's sort of CDOT's way of acknowledging that 56 homes, while a very, very small percentage of the overall, matters to folks. The other thing I'd point out there that we hear quite a bit is in Denver's tight housing market. You know, if we're acquiring 56 homes, where are those people going that they can possibly afford? So, and that is another thing that CDOT is required to mitigate. We have to follow the Federal Uniform Relocation Act. And one of the requirements under that act is that not only do we offer a fair market value for the home that we have to buy, but we also have to make up the difference when people go to a new property. So it has to be, of course, a similar property, but if they choose to stay in the community, choose to go to Aurora, to Commerce City, once they've identified a home that's sort of a like condition and size, it's in almost any case more money, and we have to make up that difference.
Yeah.
Same thing for renters. For about a 4-year period, we make up the difference in rent. So I know that's a lot of concern for the neighborhood is just the affordable housing stress that's going on there right now.
Well, yes, it's I think stress for many people here in the Denver area, and those that have no choice but to be displaced in making way for this improvement. That's got to be a burden.
Right, and so we're doing everything that we can think of, and again, this is beyond anything CDOT has done on any other project.
Really?
We've had to acquire a lot of properties on other projects around the state. When I-25 was rebuilt in Colorado Springs, I-25 in Pueblo, so it's not unusual for us to need to acquire property. What's different here is that we're making up for that in a lot of different ways.
Right, and so when we talk about a $1.2 billion project, that's where some of the expense comes.
It does. Yeah.
Absolutely. Talking about the actual construction, you've hired Kiewit Meridian Partners. The CDOT has hired Kiewit Meridian Partners to take on this project. And how did that selection process work?
So in parallel, as we were wrapping up the NEPA process, we did a request for qualifications for developers. From that, we narrowed down to 4 of the top, and these were national and international teams that deliver in the P3 market across the world. And we had 4 teams at the table for about a year and a half. And then that year and a half, as in parallel with wrapping up the NEPA process, we did a lot of refinements with the teams. And what's the exciting part about the design-build approach is that each team has some abilities to propose alternate technical concepts. And we can actually take a look at how those would fit into the project, and would they bring cost savings, would they bring innovation. And with the 4 teams at the table, that was really kind of a great aspect. At the end of the day, though, we did, they submit on at the end of the day, and we score technical, we score schedule, and we scored the cost. And Kiewit Meridian rose to the top.
You know, and I would add one of the interesting aspects of this process was actually based on a lesson we learned from the US 36 corridor. And some of your listeners might remember when we were sort of at the end of that project a couple of years ago, there was a contingent of folks who had a lot of concerns with what a public-private partnership meant, and was CDOT selling a road, and where were the toll revenues going, and where was the origin of these companies that were coming in. And so when we took a look at how to build this project and how to bring on a team, we made it a much more transparent process. You know, in the past, CDOT's really focused on what we're building when we work with the public, and what will it look like and how long will it take, and less on the how we're building it. But now that we're in this funding constraints in Colorado and have to think of different ways to bring projects together, we've been talking a lot more about the how. So as we've been going through, it's taken about 2 years to pick Kiewit. We've had a series of public meetings during that where we've actually tried to unpack, okay, here's what the contract means, and here's what that'll look like, and here's what we want from a team, and here's why we're going to partner with them for such a long amount of time, and here's where the toll revenues will go. So that's been a different aspect of this project as well, but a really important one.
So it sounds like Kiewit Meridian Partners is an incredible partner because they're investing back into the project, right?
You bet. They bring 60+ million into their own equity into delivering this project. Along with that, this team has also been pursuing this project collectively for some time, and they've really have done a lot of outreach. They have a commitment of over $1 million over the term of the contract of investments into the community, various scholarship type programs, other things that will come up. And that just shows the commitment of being part of the community as they develop, design this, and operate and maintain it.
Wonderful. And I'm sure all of our listeners here in the Denver metro area are eager for this this project to get underway, get the reconstruction done, and be useful, right?
We're eager too.
Yeah, I bet. Well, after 14 years of planning, 15 years of planning, you must be.
Yeah. Summer of 2018.
Summer of 2018. So we're looking really at June and July to really get started.
Correct.
And how long do we look at it to take?
4 years is the commitment by the development team. And as I said earlier, certain aspects of the project will come online sooner than the lowered section.
Right.
And one thing we hear a lot is, will this project be on time and on budget? Because that's always the worry, right?
Of course.
With big construction projects. Oh, you say 4 years,
It's
but
going to
it'll
take
be
8.
longer.
Oh my gosh.
But that is another advantage we see of the way we're building this project through this contract and this public-private partnership, is they are held pretty closely to that 4 years. They're also held to their budget, because we have told them when we bid this is how much money CDOT has. So a project as complex as this is, that was really important, because there's a lot of knowns out there, but there's also some unknowns in going down 30 feet below grade.
Wow.
So we have a lot of assurance that this is a good deal for the taxpayers of Colorado, just the way this is structured.
Quick question then, because you mentioned, because now we have the elevated interstate, right? That's 30 feet above grade. We're going to go 30 feet below. Why not just have it level?
Well, that comes back to the community process and why it took 14 years.
Right.
I think we realized pretty early on when we started studying this that an at-grade, I mean, that's the term we use for it, an at-grade highway would not work. But we really struggled with various concepts of rebuilding the viaduct.
Right.
We are so hemmed in there. Folks will recognize the Purina dog food plant.
Right.
That's a big visual when you come into Denver. That is mere feet from I-70. So when you look at kind of the south side, we had no
if you look
room
over the
to
railing,
go.
it's right there.
Exactly. And on the north side, we had the Swansea Elementary School that I talked about earlier. So the concepts of rebuilding the bridge we were really struggling with, because the neighborhood didn't want either of those. The neighborhood in the city of Denver didn't want either of those resources impacted.
Yeah.
So lowering the highway allows us to keep both. You know, Purina can stay a viable tax-paying, employing industry. Swansea Elementary School can stay. and we are able to knit the community back together a bit.
Right, and have a useful land area over the interstate, that there can be playgrounds and activities and bringing, like you said, bringing those communities together. Now, with just a little bit, with a little bit left in the segment here, that show here, what can we expect over the next couple months? Is there going to be, are we going to see any work being done prior to summer?
Well, I think a big commitment from the whole team, with Kiewit now on board, is really as they're refining their approach to the project, we want to be sure we're meeting with the stakeholders. So we've committed, we have monthly meetings in the community. We'll be reaching out to the different industries, bringing the Kiewit Meridian team out there, and so really having them hear firsthand the phasing and the approaches from the contractor and developer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. Tony DeVito, Director of the Central 70 Project. Rebecca White, Deputy Director of External Programs and Outreach for Central 70 Project. We really appreciate your contribution to the show today and to get us all up to speed on what we can expect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.